Hey guys, it's Josh, and welcome back to the Not So Bad Bachelor Pad, your favorite podcast for learning how to balance between being a functional adult and a raging dumpster fire. Let's be honest, some days we're all a bit of a dumpster fire. Joining us inside the Bachelor Pad today is Shane Gerhard. Shane, thank you so much for making time for us today. How we doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for having me here.
Of course. Now, we were talking about this a little bit off camera. I think it might be a little relevant to some of the things we covered today, and that's just making space for people, giving them some grace and working these out. Sometimes that happens in a lot of relationships. They're unforgiving. Not everybody gives you that grace to be like, you're human, you can make a mistake, or you don't see eye to eye on something, and
Yeah.
completely gets out of hand.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I mentioned to a lot of people is if you ever want to grow in your patience, is you need to grow in your understanding. A lot of the times we are so quick to jump to a conclusion about something or someone, when in reality we do the exact same thing all the time. And just like having that understanding of like, oh yeah, I've done that too. It helps. It makes things a little easier, which is kind of what you did in the very beginning. It's like, oh no worries. I had a similar issue.
Yeah. Now, I guess we should rewind a little bit. I was like, I'm going to have you tell us a little bit about you, about your journey, and then we'll get into some more, some deeper questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, my journey started when I was a really young kid. I was in middle school and I had this desire to fit in, to be accepted, to be wanted, to have a lot of friends, right? And through television and movies and everything that I'd seen and learned, what I perceived as being popular or having a lot of friends was more about the quantity rather than the quality. And so I had maybe one or two friends that did really care about me. And one of the problems that I ended up having and facing is I turned my back on them to pursue popularity. And unfortunately, I succeeded. I ended up changing who I was to fit in and made a lot of friends. And it came to this point where I was pushing down who I really was. All my weird quirks, all my strange attributes that I have that my closest friends now love about me, I was hiding and being made fun of if they ever came out. That only so I could be accepted by them. And so I ended up years later, I'm sitting around so many friends in my 20s, and I had, kept the same tendencies always going along, just changing who I was to fit in a little bit more, a little bit more. And I found myself like I was exhausted from work. I was looking for someone that I could just be with, be who I was with someone, just casual. I was at this event with a lot of my friends, and I realized I didn't have anyone. I was looking around and I just felt alone, even though I was surrounded by so many friends. And it was that moment where I was like, I have to change something. Something has to shift. And started pursuing friendship, relationships, the whole dynamic, how to have connection, how to win people over, like how to be authentic. Oh, I went through all those like seminars and stuff where they're like, hey, if you want connection, you have to be super vulnerable. You have to reveal your deep, dark secret to everyone. And I started doing these things, but I ended up pushing people away. And I would just vomit all my trauma on them or all my pain or all my difficulties, and they push away. And I was like, okay, well, let me reverse that. And I stopped doing that, and that would push people away because I wasn't being open. And it was funny because everyone else was the problem except for me. I was blaming everyone for not being open, not accepting me, doing all these things. And the more and more I learned about how to have proper relationships, the more and more healed I got in myself, the more responsibility I started taking for myself, and the more tools I started learning, which then it just hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, oh, it's not actually them, it's me. I didn't know the skills. I didn't have the knowledge on how to build friendships. And so I devoted my time to this over the last decade, learning how to have successful friendships, which brought me to a point where I am now, where I'm surrounded by friends that love me and care for me. But it only started when I recognized like, I have to do something about it. It's not them, it's me. It's like that Taylor Swift song. I'm the problem, it's me. And now we're getting copyrighted. I'm sorry.
Listen, that was under 10 seconds. We're good. That's such a valid point that a lot of people really just gloss over or they don't think about. Is we talked about this earlier, and I like using the term Goldilocks effect.
Mm-hmm.
So often we're either too hot or too cold. It's very rare that we find that sweet spot that's in the middle where you're just happy. And from oversharing, trauma dumping to being too quote unquote mysterious or, tight lipped, it really is hard to find the balance. And especially when you're dealing with other people in a friendship dynamic, because how they meet you. So a lot of people is how they meet you is kind of where they lock you in at.
Mm-hmm.
Like they don't really allow you to grow so much and where they place you in a box. So if you start off as somebody who doesn't share a lot and then all of a sudden you get comfortable and then you start oversharing or even just sharing a normal amount, they're just like, what's going on? They get a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, it takes time for that to develop. And yeah, depending on who you're with too, if you've been doing it for years and years, there will be that weird abrasive shift or change. One thing I've learned is if I just express to people that I'm getting more comfortable, or even I just state those little tiny things, it helps the transition period, right? It's like, oh, wow, you're a little open. I was like, no, this is actually just who I am. I'm just getting more comfortable. Just kind of stating that over and over again to certain people. I've learned it helps ease in.
Such a forward concept that obviously trial and error for you to
Yes,
really
lots of trial and error
before you could be settled on that. This is an important episode for me that I wanted to share with you guys because I think it's a problem that we face currently in our childhood, and then we definitely face when we're older, because I feel like the older you get, the less people who really start to come into your life. So the less frequent new friendships form, so to speak. Can you kind of break down the 7 circles of friendship? That's one of the principles that you kind of like live by. So I would love for everybody to hear about that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting component because when you get older, we think like, oh, it's just harder to make friendships. But in truth, what happens is we're no longer placed in situations where there's forced consistency. It's this lie that friendship should be organic because that's how I grew up. I have 20 years of life experience telling me that friendships are organic because they just happen. Like, no, what happened was you consistently showed up to a place over and over and over and over again. And it took time to build those relationships, but you kept showing up because you were forced to go to school. You were forced to go to a sports event, your club, or whatever it may have been. And you started adjusting this. But the 7 circles of friendship are great. Basically, there's 3 categories of friendships. And the first one is your environmental friends. And so these are the friends that you have when you're at school, or you're at work, or you're at the gym, or you're at your church, or you're at a coffee shop, wherever it may be. They're the people that you encounter in those areas. Then it goes to the next level, which is your chosen friendships. And these are the ones where you are purposely pursuing. You are meeting them outside of the environment. You've taken the friendship a lot deeper and you're pursuing more. You're going deeper. You're sharing more. You're being more vulnerable with them. You're having much more intentional time. And then the inner circle, the last one, which is these are kind of your ride and die people. It's a very close knit of people where you are really connected with. They know you inside and out. And honestly, this is where people will trip up a lot of times, is because they want inner circle friends so badly that they'll compare their environmental friends and qualify them. It's like, do you have what it takes to be my inner circle friend? Like, that's what I really need. And a lot of times we're like, oh, I need friends. A lot of the time, that's what we're referring to in some capacity. And so each one of those categories breaks down into subcircles, which, you mentioned, there's 7 of them. So within the environmental circle, you have your surrounding friends, which is like the people you really kind of just touch base with a little bit. Like if you go into this place, you're not going to look for them. You might have some pleasantries, exchange with them, however you want to do it. And then the next one you go into, you're going to have your familiar friends. Now, I have guys like this at the gym, right? Like I'm not looking for them when I go to the gym, but when I run into them, I'm going to have a good conversation. I know their name. They know my name. We have a good time together. And then you move into the comfort, this is all in the environmental category, right? You have the comfort friends. These are the people that, like, I have a friend group that hangs out. I don't typically initiate with some of these people outside of that place, but when I'm there, I look for them. I want to be around them. They are someone I'm excited to see. Like if I'm in a room full of people, I'm going to gravitate towards them. And so what we teach in the Friendship Blueprint is taking someone from one circle to the next. And how do you do that? It's like it changes your needs, it changes your goals, it changes how you connect with them, how you communicate with them, which a lot of the times, what we're trying to do is take someone from the environmental circle to the chosen circle, which the first one in that is the victory one. The victory circle, which is where this is a people that you don't necessarily open your whole heart to. You're not going to bring them into the process of a certain moment, but it's going to be someone that's like, you've already gone through a hard time and you're letting them know like you already got victory in it. You already passed it. They're not speaking into the moment. You're letting them into it after the fact. And you're like, hey, yeah, this last week was really hard, which leads you to the next one, which is the processing circle, where these are the people that they do have a voice in your life. Will speak into it. You're going to call them up when things are really difficult, when things are getting a lot harder, and you're bringing it in to speak into you, which then goes into the trenches circle. Which is again, like your ride and die. These are people you'll call on the bathroom floor when you're breaking down and crying. The ones you call at 3 a.m. because your tire is broken. The ones you call to go to the airport, and they're like, yeah, I need you here.
That is such a reality. And it's funny that I guarantee we don't ever think about it this hard to be like, I'm going to call it 0.5s. I was like, we think, 1 to 2 whole number intervals, but there aren't so many steps in between. You get those 0.5s, those quarters. And if you really think about friendship, or even just the people and you start to put them in place, those categories, you do see them almost in a whole new light. Because like you said, at the gym, I was like, yeah, I have a group of people who I might not be meeting up to lift with them, but if they're there in proximity, they'll definitely get like a head nod, a fist bump, or usually something. Yeah. Even at work, I was like, we have these work friends who exist to us from 9 to 5, or that set time. And then outside of that, you kind of don't think about them.
Yeah,
unless it's like the one person who just like drives you crazy, and then you talk about them nonstop.
And it also determines your boundaries, right? I mean, if you have plans with someone who you are in, let's say, the second category of friendship, where you have your chosen friends and you have plans with them, but you're at the gym and you're hanging out, and this person invites you like, hey, afterwards, you want to go get a drink? It's like, okay, well, I already have plans with this person. Let me do this thing. But vice versa, you might adjust your plans based on someone who has a higher priority in your life. It's like, oh, there's time open that I can actually move forward with. So they determine your priorities. It also determines your boundaries. But it's so helpful to understand like where people stand within your life. It's something that we don't ever even think about. And it's fascinating too, because, like I mentioned before, a lot of us compare everyone to our inner circle friendships. But there's so many studies that have come out that have shown that if you ignore your environmental friends, it has tons of mental health issues that kind of pop up and start hurting you and damaging you in so many ways if you ignore that stage of your life.
It's funny because we talked about this earlier. It's definitely a Monday. Like, words are hard to get talk together. Not always the easiest today. But I could see that because you talked about earlier how like your environmental friends and your inner circle friends might both want to make plans, but you prioritize that. The question I had from that is, I don't know. You're right. It goes back to boundaries. So often, myself included, like, I'm not going to act like I don't do this because I hate being the bad guy. It'll be like, I know I have friends with my inner circle, but I was like, this environmental friend, I was like, hey, like, we're grabbing a drink anyway. Like, do you want to come? You slide them in there, but I don't know if that's necessarily an invitation to like promote them in the friendship circle, so to speak, or is it just like a lack of boundaries on my end?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? There's no black and white answer for it. If it's something that is continuous, one thing that we teach a lot of people is to reflect about your hangouts, reflect about your friendships. And, there's so many studies that just prove just the idea of reflecting has so many good health benefits to your life. But then when you bring it into reflecting about your friendships and their patterns, but also your patterns, right? So I would go through there and I would examine, is this something that I consistently do over and over and over again? And if that's the issue, then I would probably put that in the boundaries category, where you're having issues in that lifestyle of breaking boundaries and to not hurt someone's feelings. So that would be something that you would want to grow on. Or you might have someone in your environmental friends where you've actually had a conversation with them, letting them know, I want to build a deeper friendship with you. I want to get to know you more. And that's something that a lot of us don't ever do, is communicate our desire for friendship and where we want to be going and what that even looks like. And if that's the case, and you're like, I'm prioritizing this relationship to get to know them more, then sure, an invitation would be acceptable in some capacity. It's like, hey, yeah, there's an opportunity. Why don't you come hang with my friends? And that's a really easy way to do things, especially in the early stages of friendship, is bringing them into group meetings. When you're bringing them into a stage of people like, hey, there's going to be a lot more people around. It's a little bit more comfortable. It's safer here. There's no like high expectations on anything. It's just a chill moment. yeah, that's going to be a great way to do it. But it really depends on your behaviors.
That's so true. Like you said, it does become a slippery slope. And then there's always that thing is like, if you do it once, it doesn't necessarily mean it'll become habitual. Because I mean, I've had it where I invite somebody out just one time, thinking it's not the end of the world. But then they think they've moved up into the friend group, or they're like, hey, can we go out with so-and-so again? Or like, when are we all doing that? And I was like, this is like a day pass, you know? It's just like, it's like a few hour trial period. You haven't gotten the full membership, full subscription. But that's also, like I said, it's hard to have those conversations sometimes, especially in this current scape we're in. I feel like people really aren't connecting on a personal level anymore.
Sure.
You know? So they're afraid. I feel like even when you don't connect on that deep level where it's like, hey, I thought about expanding my friendship group, or I really want to start investing or getting to know you, then those conversations are hard. But if people know where you're at, I feel like that makes it a little bit easier. Like I tell people, like, I'm not looking to get a whole new roster of friends, but I don't mind making new connections. And so to me, when I say that, it's like, yeah, I mean, like our relationship can be our relationship, but we're not going to be best friends anytime soon, so to speak.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, becoming best friends takes a long time. But then again, that's what we tend to do, right? We're looking at our inner circle friends. We're looking at the friends that are in our processing circle. It's like, well, I don't know if you have the capacity for that. And a lot of the times what we're saying is, I don't know you well enough for that. And so it's interesting when you understand where they are in the circle and you're like, okay, well, you are in the environmental category. I would say you're definitely a comfort friend, or a comfort friend, yeah, where I like being around you when I'm at this place. Like when I show up to this area, when I show up to the gym, like I'm looking for you in some way. Or when I go to church, like I want to sit next to you. I want to be near you. And you're trying to move them to the victory circle, the first stage of the category of the chosen one. And your needs change based on where they currently are at and where you're going. And so with that type of person, what you might need is like, okay, well, I just need to know that when I start sharing information with you, like it's safe. I need to know that if we're hanging out outside of this place, like it can be a comfortable environment and we can have fun. I actually need to know that like we align on a lot of different areas and we can get together, compared to whether if you were already in the victory circle and you want to get to the processing circle, like you don't open up your pain and your hardship to this person, but you want to. Those needs might be like, oh, well, I need to know that I feel safe around you. I need to know that you care about my interests. And when I share hard things, you don't just talk over me. You don't make it about you. You ask me questions. And these are things. So it all shifts and it all adjusts based on that, what you need. And so that's the beautiful thing about the circles is like, if you want to grow with deeper friendship with other people, then start by understanding where they currently are at and what do you need to be able to move to the next one. So that way you can make the slow, gradual process. Because there's studies that have shown that it takes over 200 hours to make a best friend. So to get someone in the inner circle, it takes at least 200 hours of consistent hanging out.
So I was like, I'm not even going to act like I know that math right off the top of my head, but let's just say that's like approximately like a week, right? Maybe something like that, like a week straight of interaction to like make a new best friend. The only time I see people like that is if you're in one of those random like dating shows where you're locked into a house or something with a bunch of new people. And then sure, maybe you're spending that amount of time, you know, with somebody.
I just watched the Golden Bachelor with my wife, which honestly, not a huge fan of the normal show, but the Golden one, it got me. I was like, dang, this is actually like quality, but it's amazing because it's all these older guys that are in their 60s and their 70s, and they're living with each other. And at first it's like the hardest thing they can ever think of. They're getting so frustrated. But then as the show progressed, when they wouldn't get a rose, when they would get eliminated, there was one dude that literally started crying, not because he lost his chance with her, but because he was losing the bond that he created with these men by doing what you're saying, right? Like they were in a room, they spent hours and hours and hours and hours. And it wasn't just like just being around each other. They were rooting for each other. They were opening up their heart. They were becoming more vulnerable. They were really intentional. And they're like, man, I just created something so amazing with these men that I'm going to lose here. But yeah, that is a very abnormal time to do it. You got to go on a retreat or something to get locked away with a few men.
Listen, I mean, maybe that's what we need to start doing in life more, is taking some time and actually just go on retreat. I feel like when we were younger, I hate saying when we were younger because life is so different, and you really don't. You don't get exposed to as many opportunities. The older you get, you set in your ways. You really start to like zone into your identity. Then you have family and work, so all these other things like really factor into it. Whereas like we younger, summer camp, Boy Scouts, like I mean, bang it. Like you could just name it. There was like a camp for it, and you get to hang out with these people for extended periods of time. Whereas you can't really do summer camp as an adult, unless it's your job, because you have bills to pay, or like, you have all these other responsibilities. So I was like, maybe that's, and I've said this because we're both based here out of the US. We need to take a lesson from some of these other countries and like start building holiday like into our economic, social structures, where it's like, no, like you have 2 months, like go travel, go do something. And you could use that time to start fostering new friendships, or taking your mental health days, or any plethora of things to do.
Sure. I mean, and in the meantime, too, we always let people know, like, hey, you need to start becoming the initiator. Because a lot of the times we are so passive, and that passivity over time will hurt you. We don't realize it until we need it, until we've worked enough days, we didn't reach out to our friend enough times, we're waiting for things to happen to us. And then you get to that point years later, and you've diminished your relationships because you are just waiting on people to reach out to you. And then when you're crying out for them, there's no one around. And that's the sad reality too, with the 200 hours of friendship or time together to build that. It takes time. We can't be passive. We can't just wait for things to go on. And that is the issue with a lot of America, or Western culture, I would say, is we do wait for things to begin to happen to us, to be brought to us in some capacity. I had this major issue in my life for the longest time, and it hit me. I was like, oh, I have to be the one to do something. I have to be the one to step out. I have to be the one to reach out to people. And sometimes we have this fear. It's like, okay, well, I don't want to be the one always doing that. I don't want to be the one always texting them, always calling them, always making plans. And that's totally normal and totally okay. And I've had those conversations with people over time after I pursued them for a while, letting them know, like, hey, I want to go deeper in our friendship. I really want to grow closer with you. But what I need is I need to feel pursued by you. And I need you to text me maybe once every 2 weeks. I need you to make plans once a month, and then I'll make plans the next month, and so on will like vary. And it was so minimal. Yeah. But it was necessary.
That's like such a valid point that it's funny to say this. Being friends is really just like dating, if we're going to be honest. So often that we're playing this cat and mouse game, even with our friends. Let's be honest, my best friend, I haven't been like in the same room as them probably half a decade. But you're right. It gets to the point where it's like, well, I'm tired of always being the one to initiate conversation or make plans or coming to visit. And then you start to taper off. And then you're like, crap, I really need a friend. They're not there because you haven't been initiating, or like vice versa. And so then you experience this hyper isolation, where you're alone, and you realize that I have the friends that I used to have.
Yeah.
Not even that. You start to question what is friendship, but you do the same thing like in your romantic relationship when you are in the early days. It's like, well, I don't want to text them all the time, or I feel like I'm always making the date. Like, when are they going to take some initiative? And so I was like, it just really goes to show that in any relationship, you have to be initiator, you have to be consistent, you have to think about the other person.
And if you bring it back to a relationship or dating, that's where a lot of the issues tend to come in, is they stop pursuing their partner, right? If I stopped initiating with my wife, our marriage would be damaged. It would hurt. It would not stand the test of time. You always have to be the one who's putting your foot forward and reaching out and connecting. And here's the thing too, it's like kind of where you're saying too, how, oh, I don't want to be always the one reaching out, and then so much time passes off. But the thing is, that limiting mindset, that fear, stops us from maybe even starting. And so we never even get to the point where, man, I'm just always the one texting you. I'm always the one reaching out. Like, sure, a lot of us have gotten there in some capacity, but a lot of the times we never even get to that point because we got to it with one person. And so we're bringing that story from that other friend that we had that maybe abused the friendship or never reached out or never cared, and you felt like they didn't truly care about you. And it's like, okay, well, I don't want this person to do that to me again. But they're a totally unique person, and we never even allow for the conversation to happen. That's a major component that we bring up, when we teach the friendship blueprint that we have at one of the last steps is in your reflection stage is, all right, do you want to hang out with them again? And some of the times it's like, okay, do I break up with this friend? Do I not? What do I do? How do I go forward? It's like, well, hold on. Have you ever expressed your pain? Have you expressed like, oh, well, they just talk over me, they interrupt me, they do all these things, X, Y, Z. It's like, okay, well, before you try and break things off or pull away in some capacity, have you communicated any of that to them? Have they shown any changes? Are they adjusting for you? And here's the thing too, is a lot of the times after we express our needs, we expect them to be totally different. But in truth, people change a little bit at a time. It takes us a while. Yeah, none of us change overnight, but we have this expectation that everyone else will. And so when you say, hey, when I share this issue with you, you tend to make it about yourself. You tend to kind of interrupt me. And then the next day, they might do it, but then they might like recognize they're doing it and like, oh, okay, let me pull it back. And that's a win. We celebrate those little wins, those victories. They're actually trying. And that's what we're looking for. We're not looking for the 100% results. Like, you did it again. That's it. It's over. It's more like you're making adjustments for me. Like that is an ultimate form of love. That is an ultimate form of like, hey, I care about you because I'm trying to adjust because I want us to have connection in this friendship.
That is such a good point. And it is so true. We talked about this last season, is being 1% better than you were yesterday. I don't expect you to master it overnight, or you shouldn't be expecting that if you do think people that will just have sudden personality flips overnight. That's a whole different conversation. But you're right. It's just like I said, that little detail, the fact that you noticed that, hey, I was doing that thing again. That really is a big step. That's massive.
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, I do it all the time with myself. It's like I try and give myself grace, or I expect myself to be completely different. I beat myself up and I put that on other people too. And it takes that time. It's like that understanding, that reflection. That's why it's so key. Every time that we hang out with someone afterwards, we reflect. Just take time to sit down, give yourself 10, 20, 30 minutes to just think about how your time with them went. If they offended you, if they hurt you, if they did something weird, or if you did something weird, like process it out, think through it, give yourself a moment of like, okay, what was actually going on? How was I feeling? Why did I feel that way? Because a lot of the times just thinking about it, putting words to it, actually removes the pain that we experienced with it. And that will allow us to move through it rather than away from it. We have this culture of like, hey, get over it, get over your pain, but you can't. We literally physically cannot just get over it. It always remains there until you go through it. And that's just engaging with it, engaging with the emotions you felt when someone hurt you, offended you, talked over you. Like, what was actually going on? Why did that bother you? Why did it upset you? And if you just sit there and you're like, oh, you know what? I actually felt kind of dumb, or I felt ashamed, or I felt belittled. Just naming that allows you to process it, engage with it, and move through it rather than trying to avoid it and harming a friendship because you don't do it, growing into bitterness, into anger, into hatred towards them. And it's just like resentment that could have been completely resolved if you just took a moment after you hung out for 10 minutes to just like process what was actually going on in your mind.
No, I love that. And just following up on that is, after you take the time to process, make sure that you communicate. One of the biggest points that I tell people is, you can't be upset with somebody if you don't tell them that there is an issue. If you've done the time and you reflected and you're like, you know what, one of my needs weren't met, or I felt like they were violated in that moment, that's okay. But you have to communicate that next time you see the person. I'm not saying right then, if you need minute 12, text them, fire off a text, hey, we did X, Y, and Z. No, just like, hey, casually bring it up. Or if it is something that's a super hot topic, yeah, go ahead and take another set of 10 minutes and reflect on, how do you want to communicate this to the person without attacking them? Because you're right, you don't want them to start reflecting and become bitter on that interaction. Now, I want to take a step back to when we were talking about the Golden Bachelorette. Mm-hmm. And you were like, those guys are really sad that they are giving up this community, that friendship, that bond when they didn't get a rose. And that kind of just reminds me that you kind of talk about this ankle deep approach instead of diving headfirst with secrets and all of our feelings, why do you think it's better to approach it that way to build trust and versus dropping bombshells? Because sometimes that's just the easier way to get the story out is, just everything at once. So why do you think ankle deep is a little better approach?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're taught this in so many different areas in the vulnerability culture where, hey, if you want to build connection with someone, you have to reveal your deep, dark secrets. You have to be completely vulnerable with them to build that connection. But the way I see it is every time that you share something about yourself, it's kind of like having a balloon. And so when you have a balloon in the very beginning, you take it out of the package, it's not stretchy. If you put a lot of air pressure into it immediately, it pops because it didn't have the time to get used to that type of pressure. But if you blow in some air and it just sits there for a little bit, just a little bit, it has time to expand. And then the next one, you can actually put more air in and more air in and more air in, and it slowly gets comfortable at that stage. A lot of the times what happens is when we share something super vulnerable, like super painful, or it could be something that's like, man, I had a really hard day at work yesterday, and I'm struggling with doubt that I'll ever be able to succeed. And I don't think I'm capable because my father left me and I've never really fully recovered from the pain and the trauma of that wound. That's a pretty deep thing to say to someone when you just start hanging out. It's like, but the thing is, but they don't know how to process that. They don't know how to care for you. A lot of the times we actually do want to care for people. We want to help them. And so most of us are designed that way. But what happens is we don't know how to care for you because we don't have that relational equity. We haven't had the time spent with each other. I don't know what helps you and comforts you and makes you feel safer. We haven't built that yet. And so what happens is because they're trying to help, but they don't know how to help because they don't know you, they're getting more and more uncomfortable. And so now when they see you again, they feel just uncomfortable, just like, oh, I don't want to be put in that position again. But if you take the time, and a lot of times I say, hey, if you know you're going ankle deep with someone, is if you're able to share pain or like, let's say a fact along with emotion when you're not currently in that emotion. So if you can share like, I was super bummed that kind of fell through, but you're not bummed in the moment. That's a form of ankle deep, going a little bit deeper, a little bit at a time. And then again, you bring it back to reflecting. You share little bits of yourself as you go forward. You share more vulnerability and more. And then you reflect. It's like, okay, well, how'd they care for that? Did they care? Did they listen? Did they ask me questions? Did they follow up? What was going on? Did they interrupt me? Did they talk over me? Did they make it all about themselves? Because how they treat the little things is how they're going to treat the big things. They talk over you when you're sharing a little vulnerability. When you share your deep ones, they're going to do it again. And now you're going to feel way worse than you did when all you had to do is just take a step back, recognize a little bit, release a little bit of vulnerability at the time, and kind of gauge how did that go, and then progressively go down.
That's really a great way to look at it. And I love the fact that you said, we just don't know how to take care of you yet. And that's something that I can say that I honestly haven't thought of in that context. Because we've talked about this. It's not always your friend's job or your family's job, your sibling's job to be your therapist. But you're right. The bottom line is like, they do care about you. They do want to be able to help you. But if you're always loading a million different things on them without giving that relationship time to stretch, time to grow, then it does. And people will just start avoiding. They're like, the balloon popped. They're like, okay, and that just makes you feel all the worse is because then you start to have that failure syndrome where you're like, dude, I failed. I was like a crappy friend, or like, what's wrong with me? Why doesn't this person want to talk anymore or like hang out? And it's not necessarily because you did something wrong. They just didn't know how to bridge that gap, to really understand how can they be a benefit to you.
Yeah, it's a skill. It's a learned skill that you can develop. Anyone can learn and grow in this. And it's like that, I used to blame other people, and sometimes I would go back to blaming myself, like, man, I don't have what it takes. I don't know how to do this. Or other times I'd be like, man, they just don't know how to go vulnerable. Sucks for them. They have walls up. I just blame them over and over again. Because again, too, if you start sharing vulnerable things so early into the friendship, there's sometimes this expectation that they're going to do it now. It's like, hey, I'll share my secret if you share your secret. And it's like, well, I don't even know you that well. It's like, well, I am not there yet.
That's just a good point. Is we're so used to things being tit for tat. So you're right. I recently started a new job and I have a new set of coworkers. Obviously, they come.
Congrats.
Thank you. But for me, it felt like on day one or day two, they all were super open, and I was learning a lot about their personal lives and their backstories. But I'm just like, day two, like it's a lot for me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the perfect example of I didn't have time to stretch into it, because I was like, I don't know you. So I was like, I'm not really equipped to know, are you joking? Are you not? Like, how serious of a subject is this for you? Like, can you handle a little bit of like humor mixed into it? Are you open to suggestion? Or even still, I don't know you. Like, what do you really want from me? And it's a lot. It really is. And sometimes that also, especially if it's a really new situation, that frames how people view you. If you think, oh, here they come again, like I'm about to get a whole story.
Yeah.
Or then you have to feel like if they're coming up to you, like if they have a pause, they're expecting you to go just as deep as them. That's a whole anxiety-ridden like attack right there. Okay, do I have something I want to share? Is there something I think it's okay to share? Do I want to share this with them? How are they going to respond? You just rabbit hole, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And a work environment can definitely be that like eggshell for sure. And I always tell people when it comes to building friendships at work, like identify the environment that you're in, right? And it is true. You might be coming into an area where they already have this close knit. You're walking into a place where they've developed this intimacy, this vulnerability, and and vice versa. If you're already in that, like let's say you go and you're with a group of friends who are very open, very vulnerable, very exposing in some capacity, it's natural to want to bring someone. It's like they come into the group like, hey, well, this is what we do here. This is what's going on. Like, feel free to kind of open up. So it's like having that understanding, right? Like it's natural to have that desire for, hey, like this is the culture we've already created, but then being on the other side of it where you're like, okay, well, I'm still growing into this. And one of the things that you could just easily say is like, hey, I'm still getting comfortable here. I love how vulnerable you are. This is so great. It's actually something that I've desired and I've wanted in my life. I just need a little bit of time. Let me get a kind of feel of the place and let me get to know you a little bit more before I start like opening up. But that is the direction I want to go. You always start off with like appreciation, and then you state the desire of where you kind of go, and then how you see that happening. If you express that, a lot of times what we do is like, no, I don't want to do that. No, thank you. Or we pull away, or we say something a little off and change the subject in some capacity. But if you let them know where you want to go, like, is this okay? Like, are they doing something that actually is enjoyable to you, that you do want to participate in later on the road? Then express that. Let them know like, hey, I love what you're doing. It's just, I need to get a bit more comfortable before I start sharing this with you. I'd like to get to know you a little bit more, but I'm excited to get to know you more so I can open up more. I would actually really like to go down that road.
That's an ideology that I wish we really could start to adapt and normalize in society quicker. Because for me, one of the first sets of friends that I had, which were proximity friends, we really were. We were open with each other. We spent a lot of time together. We knew each other's families, secrets, et cetera, et cetera. So that kind of framed, here's what friendship means to me.
Mm-hmm.
But as I went on and I expanded or branched out to different groups, I did realize that, hey, people told me, I didn't even have to reach, they told me, they're like, dude, you overshare a lot, or that's really deep. I'm not like there yet. And that's a conversation that I wish more people could have, because so often, and I get it. I was like, I'm not telling you to go so far outside your comfort zone, but it goes back to what I said. You have to let people know that the problem. If you can't vocalize or emphasize what your boundaries are or your level of comfortability, it's kind of also on you that you're creating not a toxic, but a failing environment, because that's what a relationship is. It's two sides, I was like, they're doing their part in trying to build a bridge, and then you just don't bring any supplies or you're not building it. You can't say like, hey, can we start the bridge next week? If you don't do that, then when the project's not done or it crumbles, you have to take some accountability on you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love the bridge analogy. That's so good. I mean, it's kind of like if your friend has, let's say, screwdrivers, some wood, some nails and whatnot, and a hammer, and they keep bringing a hammer to the friendship, but you never even express to them your needs. And what you're saying, you see them coming up to you and you're like, man, they just keep bringing a hammer. They keep bringing a hammer. I don't want a hammer in my friendship. I'm out of here. What I really need is nails. But because you never actually communicated your desire and your need to them, you never found out that they had the nails you needed. You never found out that they actually have capacity for what you are desiring, because we avoid that conversation all the time. We are either passive or we're aggressive. Either way, we tend to lead towards one of the two, and it never ends up in a simple conversation of just expressing your desire, your needs for them. One thing that I hear from a lot of people is like, oh, well, I don't want to be needy. I don't want to come off as like so needy and burdensome and all these different areas. And so one thing I'd like to help people with this and understanding is that there's a difference between your needs and your expectations. Now, your needs.
Yeah, talk about that.
Yeah, your needs are the things that if you don't get, you will die. I put it in the analogy of a flower. If you take the soil away from the flower cannot survive. It will start dying. If you take away the water, it will start dying. If you take away the light in some capacity, it will not survive. However, expectations are how you meet those needs. And that's the area that we tend to struggle with. It's not that we're not communicating our needs, is that we actually struggle in communicating how we want to fulfill those needs, which comes into the expectations. So going back to the flower analogy, the expectations, well, the need is I need soil. The expectation could be like, I'm going to use this type of soil or this one, or I'm going to rake the land, or I'm going to dig it, or how am I going to water it? Well, I'll use a pail. I'll use a hose. I'm going to actually wait for the rain to come down. And so we can adjust all these different areas on how we meet those needs, but the needs are being met. And so a lot of the times we have this expectation of how we want people to meet our needs, and then we're voicing it in a way that kind of boxes them in and puts this stress and this strain. But in truth, the conversation should actually be really simple and back and forth. It's like, hey, you know what I really need? I really need to feel pursued in this friendship. That's a need. Now, the expectation is like, how are we going to do that? But you don't even really get to the expectation. It's like until they address like, yeah, I actually want to meet that need. So you start off with what is the need? Like, oh, well, I need to feel pursued, or I need to feel safe, or oh, are you up for going on this journey with me to figure this out and getting to this place? Yeah, totally. I definitely want that. Great. Well, let's see what this looks like. Like, what does your schedule look like? Oh, what is your capacity? What I was kind of hoping for is maybe you can try and call me like once a month, like just reach out to me. Can you do that? Absolutely, I can. That's easy. Or if it's like, no, you know what? It's a little hard right now. How about we start next month? And that's where the conversation really starts flowing.
That's a great distinction between need and expectation, because I think a lot of the times some people try to use them synonymously. They're not the same word. I was like, they're close, but you're right. Intentionality plays a very big difference in each function. And so maybe that's a question I'm going to ask you guys listening now, is to drop a comment. What do you expect in a friendship? Not necessarily what do you need, but what do you expect out of a friend? Because that's something we don't think about. And a lot of the times, these are beginner level processes that we just don't actually process. It's like when you get a new toy, or, you're trying to build something, you're like, I don't need to look at the instructions. And then you go to step like 2 or 3. But I was like step 1 could be very important. Let's spend some time on that to make sure we're dotting our I's, crossing the T's. We have every nail in there, and we don't end up with 5, because we always end up with like 5 or 6 extra parts. And you're like,
yeah,
where's this supposed to go?
Yeah, it was funny that you say that too, because I don't know if you're on TikTok or Instagram or anything, but there's like the chef Teeny. I don't know if you saw her with her mac and cheese. It's like a viral mac and cheese. You haven't seen it? Oh my gosh, you gotta check it out. But it's viral and it's become so controversial because everyone is posting them doing it, right? I think she's acquired like maybe even 2, maybe 300 views in total with her different videos for it. But it's funny because I started trying to search this out. Like, why are people failing at this? Because she writes out the instructions. It's pretty easy. Like, she shows you how to do it. She writes out how to do it. She explains it all. She breaks it down fully. So there's no like theory that goes along with it. Yeah. And it was funny because it came down to attention to detail. If you skip a step, if you do something as simple as putting the heat on high instead of low at the wrong time, you miss these little details. It messes up the whole thing. The result changes because we weren't paying attention to the little details. We were missing so many minor steps that could have helped us. And one of the attention to detail that you can apply to friendship is just reflecting. It's communicating better. Like, how are you communicating? Communication is a skill. It is something you develop. It's not something you're born with. It's not something you inherit. If you stay with the only communication you grew up with, you're not going to be able to get to the level of friendship that you were all desiring, to feel accepted, to be loved, to be cared for. And so one of the attention to detail part that I would recommend people starting with is, how do I communicate? Just plain and simple. How do I have a conversation? Not just a conversation, but like, how do I communicate what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, what I need, my desires, my thoughts? How can I get this out?
It's one of the strongest things you can put on a resume. It's one of the best things you can look for in a partner and a friend. Being an effective communicator is slept on. It really does solve so many problems, or it helps you level up and reach that enriching relationship that we're all kind of desiring. We talked about this way back before we started recording. It's a question I'm bringing back this season. Is we've covered so much, and you've really broken down this friendship blueprint for us. And I think you've given us a lot of tools that everybody listening or watching, because we are on YouTube now, to start building, like I said, more enriching relationships. But I guarantee you talked about this more than once or twice. So has there ever been a point that you wanted to make talking about this, or part of it that never really gets the light shined on it, that you think, hey, I wish I had a little bit more time to talk about?
It's funny because one of the things that I love and is so critical to friendship, but also just life in general, is learning how to process your pain. It's not something that gets talked about too often, but it is probably one of the most critical components to life. And, women have an easier time to acknowledge the emotions that they're encountering. Like if they need to, they can just sit there and just cry for a little bit. But there's studies that have come out that say men won't cry because they're scared. They won't stop.
Oh, that's tough. Like I haven't heard that, but that is a very, very on the nail type of point right there.
Yeah. And so men, the way that we're designed is we are created in our nature, in our DNA, to be able to take our emotions and put them to the side. This is designed for war and combat and intense situations, to where we don't break down and cry because our brother just died. And so we can move forward with the mission and get things done. And so we have this interesting capacity to compartmentalize, to be able to put things in a box, to put it to the side and just not deal with it at the moment. But a lot of the times what we do is we end up taking that emotion and pushing it so far down that it's almost like it goes into the cellar where it has no light. And so it starts growing fungus on it. It starts building and growing this mold into resentment, into anger, into hurt, into bitterness, and it just explodes eventually. But in truth, if we can learn how to take our emotions, put it to the side for a moment on like a little shelf and come back to it and process it, that skill alone will bring us so much freedom. It'll bring so much more connection to the people in your life. When I started going deeper into my pain, into my hurt, into my struggles, every part of my relationships started improving. My friendships got better. My marriage got better. Everything started consistently getting better. And it's one of the things that's not very talked about. I love it. It's one of my favorite things to go deep into. It's like one of the things that I practice consistently. It's one of the things that I recommend that everyone has, is a group of people that you can share your heart with and the pain with. It's like getting to that inner circle place where you have those friends. If you don't have it now, like I didn't have it about 2 years ago, I looked around and I was like, I have no men in my life. There's no men around me that I can pour my heart to and expose the hurt and the incredible pain I'm in right now. But it took in that moment saying, I want that. How do I get it? That started shifting. And now I have a whole group of men that I meet up with consistently every week and share deeply.
Huge. And a lot of other guys can, you don't have to, you don't have to put on a show for me. You're listening 1,000 miles away, you're watching 1,000 miles away, but go ahead and just hit the like button. If you're one of those guys where you're like, you know what? I kind of miss having a community of men where I can open up to, or yeah, you're right. It is tough to open up and really express myself, because Shane did it. I'm putting my hand up in the air. There's nothing like having, yeah, you might have friends or siblings or family, but there's nothing like having a group of guy friends where you can sit down and just have genuine, deep, honest conversation. Sometimes talk shop, sometimes just dick around, but really you feel safe where I was like, you know what? I'm having these feelings or these thoughts, or I have this, what I think is a genius idea, but it might be something really kooky crazy, and just being able to be your authentic, vulnerable stuff with them. And I'd be like, no, there are a lot of good points there, polish it up, instead of, because they're always going to be that one guy in the friend group where no, that's just dumb. What are you talking about? But no, having actual friends that take the time to actively listen and will give you feedback, will support you emotionally. That's crucial.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting component too, because when you understand what you're desiring in your life, like it could be, I desire a group I can share my crazy ideas with and kind of brainstorm. That's a lot different than having a need for like, I need men that I can express my hurt and my pain and my desires with. And it's okay that those are two different groups and you have friends in those areas, you know? It's okay to have friends where you're at, and they don't all have to be inner circle friends. They can be where they're at. It's needed. It's so necessary to have people in your environmental friends where there's no desire to go further than that. And that's okay because you care about them where you're at. It doesn't mean they're less than, doesn't mean they're like not important to you, but you can have both. I'm glad you brought that up. That's a good.
I mean, it's like the classic analogy we use, like, know your role, know your position. Like, I never expect my receiver to block a defensive tackle. I don't hopefully my center's in snapping the ball and trying to run a 15-yard route. Know your role and just play that. And it's okay. They don't always have to be a Venn diagram, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Before we get out of here, got to do this because I've been slacking, guys. I know you've been wanting it. We're bringing back the quickie questions. Shane, I'm going to hit you with a couple questions. I don't want you to think too hard about them, but I think they're a great way for the audience to really get to know who you are as a person. And it's just entertaining for me. That's why we do it. Come on. Alrighty, now these questions will get a little tougher as we go along. I think the first one is fitting, consider we spent a lot of time talking about friendship today. And that is, what do you think is harder, breaking up with a romantic partner or a friendship breakup?
I would say a romantic partner. I think that's harder.
You think?
I think there's more emotional components on the line. There's more heartstrings attached. There's more, not necessarily invested interest, but I would say your emotions are much, much higher in romance than they are in friendship.
Okay. And that's a question that I love asking because everybody has such a different take on it. Because like I said, it's like a lasagna. Life is like lasagna. There are always so many layers. And the next question, if you could, I know you're happily married now, but if you can go back to younger Shane, high school, college era, and give him a bit of advice about dating or just, what the next chapter would look like, what would that be?
In regards to dating, I would say if I was speaking directly to who I was specifically, I would say don't change who you are to fit in. When I was younger, the culture was you date everyone you possibly can because the more women you were dating, the more popular you were. And so I would fake who I was in so many different areas to get a date, whatever it was. And it created more harm than good. I lost myself in the whole process. So one thing I learned later on in life was if you spend time actually focusing on building relationships, it's far more fulfilling than just going on dates to be popular, to have a lot of women, to whatever it is. It's not like it looks good on paper. It looks good to the world. It looks good to society and culture in a lot of capacity. But when you pursue having successful relationship long-term, that's where it's at. That's what makes you feel really fulfilled. I felt pretty empty just dating around.
Oh, yeah, I could totally get that. What are 3 characteristics that you expect from a inner circle?
One of the things I would say I need in that area is I need someone who is also desiring vulnerability. So for them to be in the inner circle, they need to have a pursuit or an intentionality to be vulnerable, to have that deep connection and conversational skills. I also need someone that asks me questions instead of tries to fix me. That's like a major thing that I need, especially when they get to the inner circle friendships, is I can communicate to them like, hey, I just need to share this thing with you. And they're not going to just trying to fix me up. Give me solution after solution. They actually like pull out of me things that I wasn't able to see myself because they were asking me questions. Another thing I would say I need in an inner circle friendship is I need someone who values relationship, like not just with me, but with other people in their life. It's very different when you have someone who values monetary things over a relationship, or they value something else in place of, because that will always be more of a priority in their life than it will be to have connection. If connection isn't their desire and their goal, we will never be able to get to the inner circle friendship, because that is so important to my own life. When you start having connection with people, there's nothing like it. There's literally nothing like it. Now, what the expectations of how that looks like, it's different with all my inner circle friends, right? Those are the main things that I would need. And it sounds probably simple in some capacity, but that is the qualifications.
Simplexity is sometimes complexity. It's just the truth. I already know this last one. It's a real toughie. I hope you're ready for it. Where can we find you if we need to connect and we want to learn more about the Friendship Blueprint?
Yeah, absolutely. You can just go to thefriendshipblueprint.com. It's as simple as that. As of right now, recording this, I'm currently selling it at $7. It's normally a $100 product. It's on sale right now. I don't know how much longer it'll be there. But what's cool is when you sign up, you get a full video course about the Friendship Blueprint. But it's interesting because when we created this, I recognize a few things. I recognize that there were so many limitations in our mindset that were hurting people from actually having successful friendships. So we created 20 mindset shifts that they can go through to actually break through those limiting beliefs and have the fulfilling friendships that they desire, they require. And we give that to people for free when they get the Friendship Blueprint. Likewise, a lot of people, they don't even know how to go ankle deep. They don't know how to do a little bit of vulnerability at a time. So we created an ankle deep question vault that they can access anytime. We give that for free. And then for the people that like struggle, they're like, oh, I don't know how to reflect. I don't know what questions to ask. I don't even know how to start. Like we have a whole heart check clarity guide. It helps you and walks you through the process of reflecting. So that way you can just like look through the questions and answer it for yourself. That's for free within the Friendship Blueprint. And then also like a lot of people struggle with rejection. They struggle with that even first stepping out part in having friendships because they're so fearful of being rejected or sharing their needs because they're going to be rejected. So we created an entire mini course on rejection. And so you get that for free as well with the Friendship Blueprint. And the last thing too that we did, we noticed a lot of people were struggling with intentionality. They don't know how to follow up or reach out to friends and create that consistent interaction. They tend to be very passive or they tend to waiting for things to happen. So we created a 30-day intentional friendship challenge where you get every single day, little tiny steps. You get a how-to, get them learning, but then you also get a little tiny step to get you going for free. That's all free in the Friendship Blueprint.
I mean, that's one hell of a deal, I have to say, because you're right. There are so many little steps or little points before you even get to fostering friendships. It's that step one. It's the fundamentals. If you don't know how to do some of these little points, you can't really expect to get a high value friendship potentially out of it. You might just hang out there in that very outer ring. Shane, thank you so much for coming on today, sharing this wisdom. Guys, thank you so much for making it through another episode of the Not So Bad Bachelor Pad. Don't forget, just go up, find the link down below and check out the fingerprint English. Click the link down below, go over and check out Shane's page, check out the website. If you follow any of the social media, make sure you let them know that you came over from the Bachelor Pad.
Yeah, let me know.
And I will see all you amazing bachelors and bachelorettes next week for another new episode of the Not So Bad Bachelor Pad.